Hey guys, it's your boy, Ballface8020, back again with another great commentary. So, a commenter asked me to talk about my experience with video games, and this is something I knew I wanted to talk about for a while, but I guess I was just never inspired to go to it, and I didn't really know how I wanted to approach it, because there was two sort of different sections I wanted to talk about. Like, I wanted to talk about the history of video games, which I find interesting, and then my experience with them. So I'll try to put that together here. So we'll start with just the general history of video games. And like when I say video games, and particularly I mean home console video games. I think a lot of people would be surprised to learn that the first home video console was actually in 1973. It's called the Magnavox Odyssey. It was invented by this Jewish fella who had been a refugee from Nazi Germany. So he must have been pretty old when he invented this, if it was in 1973. And it was, as you'd expect, pretty terrible. It was more like a toy than a video game console. You know, you would... basically all it was like a blue screen with some dots on it. And the idea is they would sell these things as like a case, okay? So you have the console, but then the case comes with 6 different games, and the games are like maybe there's every game involves you moving around some dot on the screen, but there's different things around it. And then you can also it would come in with these plastic sheets that you would hang over the television to make it look like a hockey rink or something. So the Magnavox was actually, it was fairly successful. You know, it sold 300,000 consoles or something. But like I said, you're talking about something that's more like a toy than what we think of as a video game console. And then that would shortly be followed by the Pong consoles. And that's, if you guys aren't familiar with Pong, it's like ping pong on a screen. But these consoles, they weren't different games. They were just Pong, and there was no way to play against the computer. It was just the consoles would only play Pong, and it was, you play against somebody else. So again, a little bit more like a toy, kind of like an electronic Rock'em Sock'em Robots. And but also for all ages, and you could use it at a party or something. These things were both before my time, so that that's how it got started. But in the late 70s, now you'd already had video arcades before. It'd be video arcades, and there was pinball machines too. So you had pinball machines. You had non-video arcades for a while, I'm sure at the fairs and stuff, or at the shore there probably was stuff where you could play skee ball or various games where you can win something. And then pinball machines obviously had been around for a while. And there were video arcade games you started seeing again in the 70s. But they were very primitive. They weren't necessarily as bad as Pong or the Odyssey games, but they were very primitive. And then, but where you really started to see video arcades, come into their own, is as computing technology improved, and you saw games like Space Invaders in 1978, Pac-Man in 1980, Donkey Kong in 1981. So you're seeing more and more of these games that are, by today's standard, really simple and crude, but there was enough there with the gameplay that it would cause a golden age of arcades that would last for, over a decade. I remember, when I was a kid, video arcades were paradise. We didn't have one in my town, but we had we instead had a corner deli near us that would always have 1 or 2 arcade games at a time. But when you got to I know there was this, I once got invited to this one kid's birthday party when I was in grade school, and it was at a video arcade. We just called them arcades. I don't know, not video arcades, but there are different kinds of arcades, but it was at a video game arcade. And it was like some of the most fun I ever had. And I didn't even like the kid who invited me. I don't even know why he invited me. We weren't friends or anything. But I didn't dislike him, but we weren't friends. And but anyway, I got invited there, and it was like the coins were, because you would have to put in like a coin, like a 25-cent coin, or like a quarter, or sometimes 2 quarters. And but that was like turned off, like, so you could just play the games unlimited. And dude, it was awesome. One of the best afternoons of my life. And then but anyway, so those are the like computer stuff. But you see, Atari comes out with this system called, because that was the big home console maker at the time, in 1977, called the Atari 2600. So this is a console that you can like buy different games and put different games in. Like, you can go to the store and buy a different. I'm not sure if they were in like discs or what. I don't remember. I never had one, and I've never seen one in person. I've only seen them on YouTube videos. And they would come, like, the controller would be like a joystick, like you'd have it on an arcade cabinet, a joystick with the button. And this would be like a big upgrade over the Pong games, and these things sold really well. And but they also came out at a time that arcade games were really starting to, like I said, they were starting to explode. Space Invaders, Galaxia, Donkey Kong, Popeye. And these were games that were the Atari, which was 1977, and just couldn't deal. We couldn't do games like that. So, it tried to do games like Pac-Man for a while, and when Pac-Man was released on the Atari, it was like a huge hit. Again, a little bit before my time, but tons of people were buying it. But the thing is, if you go back and look at the Pac-Man on the Atari, it just doesn't really work. So you'd see rival systems like the Intellivision and the ColecoVision. And the ColecoVision actually was designed with the idea of being able to, because Donkey Kong was really popular, and as an arcade game. And the ColecoVision was designed with, like, well, we want people to be able to play Donkey Kong. So you had this time where Atari was still really competing with, ColecoVision and Intellivision and other home consoles. Try to make more arcade-like games and stuff like that. Atari would also come out with the 5200, because the first Atari was called the 2600. They would come out with the Atari 5200 in 1982. But at this time, what you saw was the video game industry got ahead of itself, okay? Because it was expanding rapidly. Everybody was getting in the game. And you'd see, I don't know whether it was the Intellivision or I think it was the Intellivision, was made by Mattel, a toy company. So you still, and Atari was not that big a company either. So it's not like today where it's Microsoft. And, I mean, there's still Nintendo, who's got grandfathered in. But generally, making consoles is for big companies, Sony and Microsoft. Just absolutely gargantuan electronics or software companies. And, But no, back then, like I said, you could get companies like Mattel, would, not just make video games, but make, home consoles. And, but what you'd see is a lot of shovelware, which is just something you sell to the public just to cash in on if you don't know what shovelware is. But it's like the game is just garbage. Maybe it doesn't even work. It's bad. It doesn't work, And what they would do to sell the shit is they would put on really cool artwork, and then give it a cool name. But then you'd turn the game on and it would be like unplayable or just just horrendous. And you have to see some of these old Atari games to see just how terrible they could be. I mean, the truth is, even the good Atari games are pretty awful. And there were games that were back then were considered good, like the Smurfs for the ColecoVision in 1981, I think. You can go look at it now. I mean, nobody today would have fun playing it. It's horrible, but for its time, it was kind of a cool thing because it was you know, it used to be video games didn't end. Like, the point was just to get as many points as you could, and they just go on forever. But the Smurfs was a game that actually, it was like linear. Like, you would go from one side of the screen to the other, go to the next screen, and then try to beat each level. The game was shit, but for its time, it was okay. But anyway, so you have all these new systems flooding the market. You know, the new systems like the Atari 5200, and then just the completely shitty games. And what it leads to is the video game crash of 1983. So I would have been around for this one, but I have no memory of it. Obviously, I was just a baby, an infant. And and that just destroyed the home video game market in North America. Now, arcades were still popular. Arcades didn't take a hit. But the home video game market was just destroyed. It was like it was gone. It was considered just dead and buried. Like, you know, it was oversaturated, and no consumers were interested in it anymore. You know, the feeling is like the games are all trash. The kids, it's really expensive, and the kids get bored of it in half an hour. So nobody wanted anything to do with it. And you know, and that's where you know, a Japanese company called Nintendo comes in. So Nintendo was initially a toy company, you know, but they had the idea of this idea of getting something in people's houses as like a toy for children that you would then go on to use for other things. It could be like, it comes into their house as a toy for the kids, but then like people start using it as a computer and other games and stuff. And so they started playing around with this idea in the late 70s, and they were looking for a way. They wanted something that would be one of the main things they wanted to do was to be simple and affordable. Because, you know, Nintendo has always done, Nintendo isn't Sony. Okay, they can't spend billions of dollars on research and development. So while they use a lot of custom stuff, the stuff that they make, they always use mature technologies. So they don't use off-the-shelf stuff, but they do use off-the-shelf technology. They're not going to spend, like I said, billions of dollars like Sony trying to like develop a new way to do something. They're going to take technology that already exists and then refine it for their own purposes. And Nintendo actually, even though they were a toy company, did have experience in the video game market. They released the super successful Donkey Kong in 1981, which was, like, I think at the time the most successful arcade game ever, which, you know, beating out Pac-Man is pretty good. And then Popeye in 1982. And then this would be more coincident with the release of in Japan, in America it was called the NES. We just called it the Nintendo back then. But in Japan it was called the Famicom, which is short for Family Computer. And so what happened with but anyway, and in 1983 they released Mario Brothers, not Super Mario Brothers, Mario Brothers, which sucks. But at the time, I guess it was considered okay. So what Japan did is, I mean, not Japan, what Nintendo did is they had the idea. They're just a toy company, though, so they partnered with this chip manufacturer in Japan. They took the Donkey Kong cabinet to them, and they said, what we want is we want a chip that is going to, for this console, that is going to be able to replicate the arcade experience of Donkey Kong on this home console. And the company, I think they were called Rico, and they weren't able to get something quite that good. But the thing is, Moore's law, you know, computing power or computer transistors double every 2 years. It's not as noticeable now because we've kind of reached the limits. But when like Donkey Kong was released in 1981, that's 2 years of chips getting stronger. It was now feasible to make something like that for a home console. And so they were like, you know, Rico was able to do that for them. And so Nintendo, like all these, really, it was really a lot of luck. Everything coming together at the right time, right after the game crash destroyed everything in North America. They would release it in Japan in 1983. It would be well received, but it had a lot of teething problems. It was just a little too, just wasn't quite mature yet. So but the Japanese public is more forgiving. So they had to pull it from the market, and then they re-released it with some fixes, and it was a huge hit in Japan. Now, like I said, there was the video game crash in North America, had destroyed the video game market in 1983. By 1985, it was still bad. Nintendo was going to partner with Atari to market the Nintendo, but that, like, internal problems at Atari caused that deal to fall apart. So Nintendo said, okay, we're going to do it ourselves. And they put it in test markets first, but then in 1986, they released it to the general U.S. public. And there was, in the business community, a huge amount of skepticism here. Again, because remember, at this time, the console market was dead. But, I think what Nintendo understood, first of all, from success with their own, arcade cabinet games, is that there was, like I was saying earlier, what the video game crash was because the video games had gotten ahead of themselves. Like, they were releasing too much crap, and the technology for the for a good home console experience, that technology simply wasn't there yet. But at no point were kids in America losing interest in, arcade type games. They just had come to realize that they couldn't get that experience at home. And Nintendo realized, well, there is still this demand for for good games that you can play on a home console. And they knew they could do it. So they took the risk, a risk that, I think it was the guy who was selling, or one of the guys who was selling the Nintendo in North America to retailers. Like, one of the things that he had told them, like, to get it to sell is, any Nintendos you don't sell, we will buy back. So it's no risk to you. And they did some other things to make sure we get it space. And they said, like, he said that when he told that to, like, one guy, like a retailer, the guy laughed at him and signed, and he said, "It's your funeral," because everybody thought it wasn't going to work. I mean, except for Nintendo themselves. And yeah, and then so that was it. Like, so Nintendo just blew up. Like, because they said there was a hunger for it. There was an untapped market and a hunger for it. People weren't sick of home video games. They were sick of shitty home video games. And then when they had something, it was great. But another thing Nintendo did is, because they were, knew that parents were skeptical of, buying something that's relatively expensive for a toy that the kids just get bored of. So Nintendo really, initially, they didn't stick with this, but initially, they didn't really market it as a video game system. They marketed it more as a toy. Like, if you go back and watch the, like, early Nintendo ads, they really pushed the accessories, like the Zapper gun, which I remember, the thing was stupid. And then this thing called Rob the Robot, which is like a robot you can play with. It was really stupid. But both of them were ahead of their time. Talk about immature technologies. You'd see that there. But that was one thing they tried to initially, but it turned out that they didn't even need that shit. So the Nintendo would be sold with the pack-in game of Super Mario Brothers and Duck Hunt. So you would put the cartridge in, and then you would pick, did you want to play Super Mario Brothers or Duck Hunt? I remember this. And then it would also come with the laser shooter, like, like this shooting laser gun that you would plug in where the controller goes. And really, you could use it for Duck Hunt. There was a few other games that were designed for it. I'd never used any of the other games. It was pretty dumb, but it was an interesting idea, I guess. The technology just wasn't there yet. Another thing Nintendo did, because, like, they knew that, people were skeptical of all the shovelware with the Atari and the ColecoVision, is they developed a lockout chip, so it was impossible to, well, yes, companies did figure out how to get around the lockout chip and make unlicensed games, but really what you had to do was pay Nintendo a licensing fee to make the games. And by the way, when you signed a licensing agreement with Nintendo, the Nintendo was the only game in town at this time, so they would put it in writing that you weren't allowed to make that same game for a competing system for a period of 2 years, which meant that all the people who signed on with Nintendo to make games could not go and make those games for Atari or Sega's competing systems, at least not for 2 years. And that was like a good part of, like, you know, Nintendo creating a kind of monopoly. But anyway, you'd have to be, so there would have to be licensing to quality control. So, like, don't get me wrong, there were plenty of shovelware Nintendo games that were like just complete shit. I suffered through many of them, but as long as the game was licensed, it was at least functional. Like, they wouldn't release games that were outright broken. And you could, on top of that, every Nintendo game, you would see on the back of the cartridge some screenshots from the game, as opposed to just showing you like doing a bunch of artwork and then not letting you actually have any idea what the game is going to look like. So everybody, you go into the game having at least some idea of what you were in for. And so licensing. Okay, so so that's the Nintendo story, right? The story of the NES. And you guys who weren't around, like, you there's really no way for you to understand how revolutionary it was when you saw it. It was mind blowing to see it. So the first time I saw it when I was either when I was 5 or 6, I don't remember, 5 or 6, at the house of, we had these, I don't know if you guys know what an au pair is, but like basically it's like a nanny who's like usually a young person, usually a woman, not always, who comes and lives with a family for, again, usually a year. It depends. In our case, it was always a year. And they because my parents both worked full time, so you know we had so like you needed somebody around during the workday to take care of the child care. So frequently, this one au pair that I had one year would take, this was before my sister was born, so it would take my brother and I over to the home of a friend of hers, a fellow au pair friend of hers, to these 2 kids, she was the au pair to 2 kids who I didn't particularly care for, but they had a Nintendo. And that was the first time I saw it. And I remember the games. I must have seen them play Super Mario Brothers at some point, but I don't remember that. My memories are of seeing them play Legend of Zelda and this game called RC Racer. And neither of these games hold up, particularly RC Racer. But oh my God, to like a little kid seeing like Legend of Zelda, like the world just felt like it was infinite. You know, like it's this open world game and it just felt infinite. It was so cool. And RC Racer was a lot of fun too. And so for me, it was love at first sight. So I started bugging my parents, like, I need to get one of these, one a Nintendo. And then, you know, my parents eventually relented and they said, okay, we're going to get you one for your birthday or whatever. So the idea was they didn't want it like downstairs with the family TV. So they're like, we'll get a TV that we'll put in your back room. Because at this time, my brother and I still shared a room. And there's like a back room behind where our room was. So we'll get a TV. We'll buy you a TV and put that in your back room, and then later on we'll get you the Nintendo. So they got me this TV, like an old school. This would have been like around 1990 or something, 1990, 1989, like an old school big green TV. You know, like a big thing that you had to like carry, and there was no remote. It was like, you know, like you pulled out the switches and like turned it to turn the channel. We didn't have cable in my house either, so, you know, but we would put that there, and then, you know, it was the night before my birthday, a few weeks later, I guess, where my mom and my dad were in that back room the whole night, and they just said, oh yeah, we have to get the TV set up so, you know, the Nintendo is ready for tomorrow. So I was like, okay, whatever, and, you know, I went to bed. And then they woke me up the next morning and they were like, hey, come and check it out. And the Nintendo was set up. Definitely still, like, I remember one of the best moments of my life. And now I'm not sure I think they just got the thing with the pack-in game, with the Super Mario Brothers. I don't think that they had gotten me any other games for that first thing. So just playing Super Mario Brothers and a little bit of Duck Hunt. And I wasn't even a huge Super Mario Brothers fan, but I didn't care. It was just that, like, it was just so great. And, you know, like I said, Super Mario Brothers especially, very revolutionary game. There really hadn't been anything like it. And my dad was like immediately became a total addict. And my dad actually figured out how to beat it. Like, he beat it because it was hard to beat Nintendo games. You know, you didn't know what to do. You could like you could either buy, you know, the Nintendo game magazine. You knew somebody else who knew how to beat it, or call the 900 number. But, you know, certainly my dad wasn't going to do any of those things. But he figured out how to beat Super Mario Brothers, and that he certainly didn't know all the, you know, all the warp whistles and stuff. So that's pretty impressive. And I never beat it. In fact, when I was a kid, I never beat a single Nintendo game. The Nintendo games were really difficult because, there's a couple reasons for that. One is just that's just how things were done back then. You know, like people liked harder games, and the other is that you couldn't. It wasn't like today where you can pack on like these. You're limited in how much game you can stick in a cartridge. So the game needs to be very difficult to beat, you know, to play through, because otherwise, you know, to finish a game, once you know how to beat it, to finish a game is like 10 minutes. You know, yeah, you know, often less, depending on the game and how good you are at it. And so where am I going with this? I don't know. But anyway, so I would go on to, you know, this is late 80s, early 90s. I've talked about this before. Every weekend, for most of America, you know, kids in America, you go out, every Friday night, you go to the video store. One video for mom and dad, one video for the kids, like a movie for the kids. And then you also get a video game for the kids. So it's a new video game every weekend. And then I would also get games as gifts for like birthdays and, you know, holidays and stuff. Sometimes, you know, I was still a good student at this time, so I'd get gifts for good report cards. And, yeah, so like a lot of games. I wasn't able to beat any of them, but I like, you know, Batman is a great game, still holds up. I owned that one. RoboCop. Not a great game. I really enjoyed it at the time. It's not. It's usually not remembered as one of the best NES games. But if you're just, the truth is, most of the NES library, as great as they were at the time, they really mostly don't hold up that well. And just because, I mean, for a lot of different reasons. But there are some that do. Like, not many, but there are some that do. And RoboCop is one that's pretty good. I would say that RoboCop is the 10th best NES game. Like, if you're looking, like, at the time, maybe it was nothing special, but in terms of, like, when you're grading it on the curve of what held up left, like, if I was only going to have 10 NES games to play, RoboCop would be number 10. So that RoboCop, I never owned any of the Mega Man games, but I played a few, you know, Mega Man 5 for sure. I remember renting that, not doing very well with it. Not sure if I played any of the other Mega Man games. I don't remember playing Contra as a kid. I do remember playing Ninja Gaiden and not being able to get past the second level, which that would happen sometimes with Nintendo. You'd rent a game and like you'd get stuck on the first or second level, and that's your whole weekend. There's a game called Bubble Bobble. Again, it doesn't hold up, but at the time it was really fun. So yeah. And then, you know, but it was cool. Like, I really enjoyed it. I really liked playing all the games. And then the Super Nintendo came out. And the Super Nintendo was like, a lot of parents were really skeptical about buying it because a lot of them, they'd only, in the last year or two, Super Nintendo came out in 1991 or something, and I got my Nintendo in 88 or 89, I don't know. So a lot of parents were really skeptical because they're like, oh, wait, I just got my kid this console, and now you're saying I got to get a new one, and it's like twice as expensive as the last one. And, but my next door neighbor had it. My next door neighbor had one. And I wasn't close with him, but my brother was his best friend. They were the same age. And we'd go over there to play sometimes. And I was like, dude, this is so cool. I've got to get one like this. But like, generally for us, like for getting gifts, it would either be for a really good report card, which would have, but it was not for every report card. So only for the second and last report card of the year. So and I'm pretty sure that he got his in the summer. This next door neighbor got his in the summer. So we were past that, which means no more gifts until birthday or Christmas, which are both, in the later part of the year. So there wasn't, and I didn't have any money because I was a kid and, I couldn't work. And I would have been willing to work if there, but there was no way for me to earn money. And so I really wanted one, and I think my brother wanted one too, but we just couldn't get it. So we just had to leech off, our neighbor for a while. And yeah, there were I thought the games were really cool. That was the first time I think that was the first time there was Mario Kart. And again, when it was new, it was like, wow, this is really cool. And it was something really new. Now, I mean, I guess it kind of holds up. I mean, people still like it, but when it was like new and on the Super Nintendo, it was really cool. And I actually didn't get a chance to play it that often, but he had some other like quirky games. So I was into it. That's what I wanted. But, I was also getting older. And I wasn't really, the Nintendo, the NES had been dominated by the genre of side scrollers. This character here, you're moving to the other side of the screen as you move through the game. And I was getting older, and, I was getting more interested in sports games and fighting games. At some point there had been Street Fighter 2, or the arcade game, was in my local deli, so I was really into that, and there was nothing like that on the NES. You needed either a Genesis or a Super Nintendo. And I had became like a huge hockey fan. I remember what it was. I was watching the Olympics with my dad, and the U.S. men's Olympic hockey team was generally considered a bunch of bums. And they were like, I guess this would have been the 92 Olympics. I don't know. And but they were playing. They ended up not even getting a medal in the tournament. But they stormed out to, like, they won their first 4 games or something. And everybody's like, where did these guys come from? And I was watching it, and I was just immediately fell in love with it. Fell in love with ice hockey. So I'd become a huge ice hockey fan. And I was good. I played a lot. I didn't actually play ice hockey, but I played hockey like in my garage and stuff. So I was a really good street hockey player. And but like so I became, and Detroit. So the Red Wings are really big here. So really big Red Wings fan and stuff. But also, like I said, I was interested in fighting games. So as I got more, getting older, I started to lose interest in these side-scrolling games and just become more interested in, fighting games and sports games. And I myself was becoming less and less interested in games, period, because I was more interested in just playing hockey. That was my love, was playing hockey. Not that I didn't still enjoy video games, but it wasn't like my passion anymore. So when it came time that I was able to ask my parents for an upgraded console over the Nintendo, I wasn't interested in the Super Nintendo anymore. I didn't really want to play the new Super Mario Brothers World, or like the various games that had interested me a year or two earlier. I wanted the system that was going to let me play Street Fighter 2 and EA Sports NHL Hockey. And that would be like the rest of my video game career pretty much through my adolescence and teenage years. I would just be like, because I would go from the Sega Genesis to the Sega Saturn to the Sega Dreamcast. Um, that would be the Sega Dreamcast would be my last console before I went on to college. And because those were games those were systems that were designed for sports games and fighting games. So I would still play a lot of video games, but it was I would play, with my first Sega, because my brother would come sometimes play the Sonic game, which I always hated that little guy. And but no, I didn't really play console games. I mean, I didn't really play like I don't know, side scroller type games anymore. I just wasn't interested. I just played, like Mortal Kombat, especially Mortal Kombat, Street Fighter, hockey, and then there was this game called Robo Pit on the Sega Saturn that was really cool. I would play that all the time. And then on the Dreamcast is when you started seeing the football games that are more like the Madden games we know today. In fact, like when I first played like NFL, I think it was called NFL 2K on the Dreamcast. It was like I was so shocked. I was like, is this like real? Like, are they like I thought like, are the announcers like in like AIs that are actually commenting on this game? And because it just looked so realistic and sound. I mean, not by today's standards, but by their standards, those standards, it was just a whole nother world. So yeah, so I was more into games like that, but then, like senior year of high school was a really weird time for me. I, sixth and seventh grade, I mean, were, whatever. I mean, sixth grade, I was like a basket case, for the first half of the year. But after Chris came back from Christmas break in sixth grade, I had kind of mellowed out and things were okay. I mean, I was still a dork, but I at least wasn't like, a basket case. And then seventh grade, like, yeah, again, still a dork, but it was weird because like I was a dork, but I was down with some of the cool kids. But, I was really scrawny and, I just, I don't know. Seventh grade, I was I don't know. Seventh grade, I was interested in skateboarding for a while and then biking. I think I've talked about that before. But seventh grade, I was kind of, I don't know. I think it's an awkward age for everybody. But for me, it was, I don't know. It was okay. That summer, you can go watch my When Keeping It Real Goes Wrong video. That summer is the time that I would get in a fight and get my nose broken for the first time. But then in eighth grade, is when I got really sick, with the asthma. And then, that would go, I'd mostly get over it in ninth grade, but then I'd have like a whole bunch of other psychological shit in ninth grade. Then mostly recover from that in 10th grade, but then in 10th grade, I got hit with the sleep disorder. And which would be a problem from 10th and 11th, all of 10th and 11th grade, and then that just like a real traumatic summer after 11th grade. But the thing about senior year is things had really settled down. Like they finally got me on a good medication. And like I had I took the SATs and did fairly well, and like knew I was going to be going to college, and like it's weird when you're a senior in high school. You're just like everybody was so done. Everybody was just like done with all of this. Like like we were still there, but like mentally we had moved on. And so I wasn't really doing anything because I didn't work. I didn't work during the year. I would get a job that summer, but I didn't work, and I wasn't really very social. I was social in school, but well, at least somewhat social in school. but I like wasn't really interested in going to parties or anything anymore. I didn't want to risk getting in trouble. And towards the end of the year, I started to go out a little bit. But I mean, like I didn't have much to do at school because I wasn't in honors classes anymore, and we're seniors. I wasn't really doing my homework that often. I was skipping class a lot, so I had a lot of time. And there was this thing called Nesticle, which was the first time I'd ever seen emulators for video games, and it was just so cool to be able to go on the computer, because this time we had one computer for the whole family. So I'd go into the dining room where our family's computer was. You'd fire it up and you'd open up Nesticle, and you'd literally have the entire NES library. You could go back and play. I could go back and play all the games I remembered from when I was a kid. And I don't know. It's just a mixture of nostalgia or whatever. But I was like, dude, this is really cool. Because these were all games. All these games were things I thought of. You could either rent them, or you could buy them for what was then $40. But by today's standards, you're looking at like 120. So it was expensive. And then that, like I said, I couldn't work, so you didn't. So these were things that were always out of reach to me. And now they're all there. I have access to all of them. And I'm older and presumably wiser. Maybe I can actually figure out how to beat these games now. So the first game I picked was RoboCop. And I went and I played it. And I beat it. That is to this day the only Nintendo game that I've ever beat without having to ask for directions or figure it out on my own. I mean, or that I was able to beat by figuring it out on my own. And I was really happy with that. So then I went back to play Batman, and I got stuck at the exact same level I did when I was a kid. But now there was the internet. Now, granted, it was the primitive internet of 2001, but the internet nonetheless. So I was able to look up how to beat the parts I was getting stuck at. So I beat Batman. Then I went and played Mega Man. Started with Mega Man 1, which is a pretty crude game. It became much more polished with Mega Man 2. But I beat that too. And then eventually kind of lost interest in those things too. But it was cool to go back and play them. And then, in college I would, there was not an arcade, but there was a room near, there was a student center near me where they would sometimes have arcade games, and I would play games like, I don't know, what's that game where you're the fighter game with dinosaurs, who will rule the new Earth? Primal Rage. I did manage. It cost me a ton of money to get through, but I did manage to beat Primal Rage once at least. And then, but yeah, and then later, after college, when I would eventually move back home, I would get I think I got an Xbox or something at some point. I don't know. I got something at some point to play Madden games, because I was still a really big football fan back then. But eventually I stopped even doing that. And then a few years, I don't know how long ago it was, but I started playing Nintendo games again on the emulators. And I went back and I beat Mega Man 6 and Contra, Super Mario Brothers, Ninja Gaiden, G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero. There's also another G.I. Joe game called The Atlantis Factor. It sucks. And checked out a few other games. So I'll occasionally, because I've got two different computers, because I use one computer to entertain my nephew when I have to babysit him, and then one computer is mine. So on my nephew's computer, I have I do have the RetroArch emulation system. So occasionally I'll play Mario Brothers or Contra, or not really. I don't really play Ninja Gaiden anymore. But although, yeah, I don't know. You can make a case that Ninja Gaiden is the best of the NES games. The sequels are terrible, but the original is good. Another thing is that I don't know what it's like now, but there was a real divide during the games of the era of the Nintendo and the Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo, there'll be a real divide between console type games and computer games. Like computer games, like, I mean, technically, I guess you could play games like Prince of Persia on your home console. I never saw it. But certain games like Prince of Persia, Deja Vu, Doom, those games were just seen as more computer type games. Not that, I mean, eventually it all got mixed together. Now, we did have a family computer upstairs in my back room. And we would play this, my brother and I would play this game called Quest for Glory. We had some other games too, but Quest for Glory was, it's an RPG. So you're playing from the point of view of a hero. And I thought those games were actually better than the Nintendo games, because you could do that. You could just go and play that game for like 8 hours and get like totally absorbed in it. I think there are still games like that, but Quest for Glory was kind of revolutionary when it came out. I think a game before that was kind of like that was King's Quest, but Quest for Glory had better graphics and stuff like that. And it was also an open world thing. That was cool, so I would play those sometimes. But now I don't really play video games anymore. I don't think that I mean, some of it's I just got older. But I don't really think they're the same. I don't think it's the same experience. I mean, part of it's being older, yeah, but it's not the same experience in a world with the internet and interconnectivity. Like video games just were a more immersive, more magical, more entertaining experience pre-internet. It's just like something. Just the internet just changed a lot of stuff. And I mean, just some things just aren't as good in a world where the internet exists, and it's not always clear why. Like, why would there being internet make video games less enjoyable? I don't know. But I mean, I can't even prove that that's true, but I think that it's a big part of it. Although, in fairness, when I was a kid playing the Nintendo games, playing Nintendos, it really was for kids or maybe teenagers. Like, adults weren't playing it. So, it could just be, maybe I'm just blaming it on the internet, but that really isn't what it was about. But I would think that had I been like 30 years old in 1988, I probably would have been playing a lot of NES games. I don't know. That's all for now. See you in the next.